think that anybody has really looked at it in detail and tried to come up with an overall picture of what happened to Jewish believers in the Shoah. So I'm going to demonstrate great chutzpah and have a quick overview of how many national alliances of the Messianic Alliance there were before the Shoah, how many national alliances remained after the Holocaust, and how many Messianic Jews died in the Holocaust. And I hope you can hear me okay. This is a very preliminary survey. Please help me to get more accuracy if you are from a particular country or you know a particular situation well. I would really appreciate your input and feedback. So having given that caveat, I'll now jump in and have a go. It's worth remembering that at the end of the 19th century, according to a mission historian, Johannes de la Roy, he estimated that some 224,000 Jews had accepted baptism. I'm not saying if they were genuine believers in Yeshua, but they had converted officially and been baptized. And he was a very methodical scholar, and he looked up baptismal records. I can send you, if you read German, the whole book he put together. He estimated that there were some 72,000 had joined evangelical Protestant churches or non-Catholic churches. Some 57,000 had joined the Catholic Church. Some 74,000 had joined the Orthodox Church, making a total with what he called mixed marriages of some 250,000 baptisms over the 19th century. That figure is often used as a basis for how many Jewish disciples of Yeshua or Jewish Christians there were at the time of the Holocaust. But we should remember he's surveying a whole century. So you could really divide that by 100 and say that he's reckoning on about 2,240 baptisms per year that were recorded in church documents. So it's an interesting figure. It's sometimes taken out of context. And we now go on to what the figures were of the estimates of Jews who were officially Christians at the time of the Second World War. So the reports of
Richard, is this for Germany or the whole of Europe?
I'll explain. I'll break it all down. Okay. So this first figure here is the non-Aryans in Germany, according to a census conducted in 1933 by the Nazis. So this is German, but we'll see it spreads out. And they estimated, and these are not all these estimates are disputed, by the way. So I'm just giving you estimates of estimates. Number of Jews living today that have left the Jewish community, 15,000. Those who've converted to Christianity. Descendants in the first generation, that's their children, 72,000. Descendants in the second generation, that's with one or more Jewish parents, 46,000. And descendants in the third generation, that's with one Jewish grandparent, 26,000. Roughly 160,000 of non-Aryan Christians. The German government really wanted to find non-Aryan Christians in the churches to say that they were Jews, even though they weren't officially Jews by religion. And this was reported, it was reported in the Swiss papers as well. There was another census, 1939, and it estimated there some 475,000 Jews who had the Christian religion. And they had a slightly different and larger statistic And they also talked about Jews in lands that were coming under the control of Germany. And this was reported in the British press as well, with these types of figures. So now I'm going to go to the alliances, and I'm going to give you figures quickly for each national alliance. So in 1927, there were 13 national alliances. In 1937, there were some 16. The numbers fluctuate over the years. They don't all turn up at conferences. But what is interesting, in the alliance printed copies of the magazines, I don't know if you can see my screen as well, you get a list of the alliances, the addresses of their presidents, and the names of their presidents, each issue of the magazine, the printed copy. This is not the online copy that you can also get on the internet, but the printed copies have the lists. So in 1938, which is the last list we have before the Holocaust, before the Second World War, we have the names of the presidents of 16 alliances. And I'm going to go through these 16 alliances very quickly. And if you have questions, or if you'd like the PowerPoint, I can send you that. And Joel, if I go on too long, you stop me, okay? So in 1939, only 7 alliances attended an international conference, an emergency conference in 1939. Great Britain, Holland, Romania, Hungary, Palestine, Danzig, which I'll come to later, and Yugoslavia. The others couldn't come. In 1942, in the middle of the war, these alliances were suspended. It's so sad. You see gaps and blank spots. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Danzig, Denmark, France, Germany, Holland, Hungary, Latvia, Poland, Romania, Russia, Yugoslavia. We don't know what's happening. And really, that just gives you the picture of what happened to the alliances during the Second World War. 12 of them were suspended. And of course, thousands of refugees were coming through the alliance hostels in London. They had 7 hostels. They were trying to get out, and some of them stayed in the UK. Some went to Israel, some went to America, some went to Brazil. They went all over. Thousands went through. But what of the alliances that were still there? Well, immediately after the war, they started visiting these places where alliances have been. Konrad Hoffmann, Jacob Peltz, Heinz Leuner, all went and visited. You can see there's still lots of gaps, but slowly they're beginning to reconstitute. And so I go, and then by 1947, there's still missing alliances when they have their first international conference. 1950, which is the 25th alliance, they've now got presidents back, and they've now got many of them reconstituted. And that's a picture of the conference in 1950 at Woudschoten in the Netherlands. So you have Harcourt Samuel, the Dutch alliance president, who becomes the international president, Van Gelderen, and Arnold Frank. Are you with me so far?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Let me go through. I'm going to jump through this and just talk about the problem of saying who is a Messianic Jew or a Hebrew Christian or a non-Aryan Christian. And Kelvin Crombie has written a detailed study of Jewish Christians in the Netherlands during the Holocaust. He's working on the whole European context. He has 7 different types, would you believe, of Messianic Jew, Hebrew Christian, non-Aryan Christians, from the very genuine disciple of Jesus before 1939 to the person that was baptized as a child after the 1st of September 1939, simply for survival purposes by a well-meaning Christian or a Christian institution. Now, I have taken a very broad definition of who is a Messianic Jew or a Hebrew Christian. I've basically used the definitions that were used by the Nazis, who said if you're one quarter Jewish, one Jewish grandparent, and if you're connected with the church, you are a non-Aryan Christian. And I've done that because it's not for me to judge somebody's faith. I hope that all of us who say we're Messianic Jews, Jewish disciples of Yeshua, are genuine followers of Yeshua. But I'm not going to make a judgment on that. These people were Jewish enough to be wiped out by the Nazis, and they were seen as Christian enough not to get help where some people did, and also to be rejected often by their own churches. So let's go quickly through these alliances. In Austria, and I'm using figures normally from Yad Vashem or from the the Washington Holocaust Museum for the general figures. How many Jews died? 206,000. How many Jews in Austria? About 206,000 before the war. How many died? About 31%, 65,000. How many Jewish Christians? I've made an estimate there of at least 5,000 because it's reported that there were 100 baptisms per year from 1928 to 1939. And I've estimated that there were some 1,500 who died as the same percentage of the 65,000 who died of the 206,000. So it's 31% of those Jewish believers died. How many survived? According to the accounts of several people working in the Swedish Israel mission and working in Vienna, there was at least 3,000 who were given visas, 1,500 to Sweden, UK, and USA. And one of the people that continued the alliance after the Second World War, Felix Proper, who in 1956, along with the Dutch alliance, proposed that Jewish believers should only marry other Jewish believers, which is much more normal in the Messianic movement now, but then it was rejected by the alliance. It was accepted by the Dutch alliance. I don't know if they would still do that, but he advocated this, and he was well known. I'm going on to Danzig, which is really now part of Poland. We call it Gdansk, but there was a very unusual situation in Danzig. It was a free port of passage before the Germans took it over, and before it was taken over by the Russians or the Poles. There was a Danzig alliance. Only 10,000 Jews in Danzig. Most of them escaped early or were wiped out. And I'm estimating from the report of Paul Rad that some 200 Jewish Christians, about 2% of the Jewish population were there, about half died and maybe 100 escaped, including Paul Rad. And he was then imprisoned by the British as an enemy alien. And there was even questions in the Houses of Parliament in Britain. Why was he still being interned? He was a loyal, patriotic subject. He was driven out by the Nazis. Why should he still be interned in a British internment camp? I tried to follow what happened to the presidents of these alliances just to see what it looked like. Moving on to Denmark. Denmark was also a very small Jewish community. Many of them escaped because the Danes took them over to Sweden. So out of 7,800 Jews, only 116 died. The rest were rescued in Sweden. And I'm estimating 2% of that 7,800 may have been believers in Yeshua. So maybe 5 died and maybe 150 survived. The alliance continued. And also what happened was, we know that Shiradsky, who was the president, and Petri, who was another well-known Jewish believer, they continued with the Danish Israel mission. And they were active in advocating for their Jewish people and for Jewish people escaping. And they helped in the miracle, it's often called a miracle, of how Denmark saved nearly all of its Jews from the Nazis by taking them to Sweden. And I think that would have included those Jews who believed in Jesus in Denmark. I'm going on, that's a bit more on Shredzi. In France, we know that there were some 300,000 Jews, and of that, a quarter were murdered by the Nazis. So I'm estimating that there were 87 who turned up in 1939 for the formation of the French alliance, or rather the reformation of the French alliance. I think it might have been as many as 6,000. Most of them, I think, were Catholic Jews, not Protestant Jews, because the church in France was predominantly Catholic. And it was reconstituted under Arne Forsberg, who was a Lutheran minister from Sweden who was sent to Paris. And these are the letters that he wrote asking for help. This is Forel's help. There was a Comité des Églises chrétiennes pour les chrétiens non-ariens, a committee of Christian churches for non-Aryan Christians. This is a 1938 letter, typical. It's in the Alliance archives, asking for help, for visas, for medical aid, for pathways out of the country. And now I'm moving on to Germany, the most significant alliance. Oh, Arne Forsberg's in the wrong place. How many Jews in Germany? Yad Vashem, 566,000. The Holocaust Museum, 237,000. You can see that the estimates vary, but let's take the larger figure. 33%, 165,000, are put to death. And the strong estimates are 90,000 Protestants, 26,000 Roman Catholics are Jewish in one way or another. And so an estimated 33% of them, that's 38,000, are killed, and maybe 76,000 survived. The Alliance, the great Arnold Frank of Hamburg, he is imprisoned, but he escapes. The Alliance is reconstituted, and Heinz Leuner, the secretary for the European alliances, travels backwards and forwards. This is quite well documented. Heinz Leuner was a very well-known figure. He was well loved by the Germans because he preached a message of forgiveness and reconciliation. And Arnold Frank was also a very familiar person on the scene, but I'm trying to get the global overview of this, and I've studied it a bit more in detail, but maybe some 60,000 non-Aryan Christians survive, according to Nicholas Railton, and he maps their journeys. They also had this refugee committee, which was often connected to Pastor Gruber in Berlin, who had a whole network of Jewish believers in Jesus helping him. They were trying to settle refugees in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Kenya, in Cyprus. They liaised with the Home Office. Most of these projects didn't succeed, but they did what they could, giving aid and sending money wherever possible. Bishop Bell of Chichester was especially trying to help non-Aryan Christians escape. And there's a wonderful book, Evangelisch getauft als Juden vergolft, baptized as Protestants but persecuted as Jews, which goes over 500 stories of different German Jewish non-Aryan Christians who escaped the Holocaust. Heinz Leuner, their Secretary for Europe. I'm not going to go through his details. I'm going to go to Holland. I know Joop Akker will have some things to say here. There is a book by Kelvin Crombie that's just come out, Jewish Christians in the Netherlands during the Holocaust. And he has gone through the lists, which until now I think have not been familiar to many people, of the numbers of Jews who were sent out to the concentration camps and the numbers who are recorded as Christians. So how many died of the Jewish Christians? Well, he reckons there was 1081 Jewish Christians on the lists, and he reckons that 440 430 were killed in the Holocaust, and therefore his maths, 1451 survived, and the alliance was reconstituted. And Marjorie Aberley, some of us will remember her, and others. And of course, Edith Stein, the Catholic nun, Etty Hillesum, a great theological voice today, also lost their lives in the Shoah. You can see what I'm doing. I'm trying to go through every country with some very rough figures. I don't think anybody has actually put this together in a table before, so please forgive me. I'm trying to do that, and I can send you the table in detail for you to help me correct it. The Hungarian situation, I spoke a bit about this a few months back, but we reckon that there were 455,000 Jews, of whom 60% were killed, murdered, 270,000. I'm reckoning on the figures that are given by certain Philip Siegel, a Holocaust historian, 97,000 Christians of Jewish background in Hungary, and therefore 60% of them was 58,000 who died, and maybe 38,000 survived, including Deslo Voldes, who eventually escaped to New York. And then when Hungary was under the Iron Curtain, many of these alliances were shut down by the Russians, even after the Second World War. But even today in Hungary, there are many Jewish background Christians still in the churches. And in Hungary, there's a special interest in this. In Latvia, the president of the alliance was a man called P.R. Smoljar. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. He actually published a book in 1937 called The Rescued Brother. I don't know any more than that, but I'm assuming he managed to escape persecution, and I'm still trying to find out what happened to him. The population of 93,000 Jews was almost totally wiped out. So I assume that that is what happened with Jewish believers in Yeshua as well. Poland, Moses Gitlin was the president of the alliance. Some of you may have known him in America. He ended up in Cornerstone, Ohio, with a ministry with Chosen People Ministries, especially to Ukrainian-speaking and Russian-speaking Jews. But at the start of the war, there were some 3,400,000 Jews, and nearly 3,085% of them were murdered. I think that would be the same for Jewish Christians. I haven't estimated for them, but about 2% might be the estimate I would use. These are pictures of the Polish alliance. This was the CMJ base in Warsaw and their Jewish workers there. And this was the Hebrew Christian Alliance in Warsaw in 1933 in Poland. And this was Jacob Joch, who managed to escape quite by accident. He was in England. They asked him to stay in England to speak at a special conference. Somebody else was ill. And before he could go back to Poland, the war had begun. He was stuck in England. He spent his ministry here in England. He led Eric Lipson to the Lord. And then he went to Toronto, Canada. And we've just had the first Jacob Joch lecture in memory of Joch. In Portugal, there were Marano believers in Jesus, led by a man called Eduardo Moreira, who was a Protestant pastor from Jewish background. And of course, Lisbon, Portugal, was a neutral country. So there were about 440, maybe a few more, 1,000 Jews who lived in Portugal, but some 60 to 80,000 Jews from other parts of Europe passed through. I'm reckoning that no Jewish Christians died. There weren't that many of them. I don't know the size of the alliance, but there was an alliance, so I'm assuming at least 10 of them. And that continued after the war. And Eduardo Enriquez Moreira continued as a very prominent pastor. He also went into the government in Portugal. In Romania, We probably have heard of Richard Wurmbrand. The Jewish community, 38% of them were wiped out. So 750,000 Jews, remaining some 250,000 Jews. And I'm assuming about 2% of them, because of other ways I've looked at it, would have been Jewish background believers in Yeshua. So maybe 5,000 survived. But communications were interrupted. And after the war, because of communism, Richard Wurmbrand and others were incarcerated. And it wasn't until Anutza Moyes and others, she escaped and went to Denmark and worked tirelessly for the release of Richard Wurmbrand. The story of Romania still needs to be studied in greater detail. And I don't have time here to tell the story, but Jews who believe in Yeshua in Romania, I met many in Bucharest who were Protestant pastors who said, well, I had a Jewish grandparent. In Russia, again, we have even less information because of the communists after the Second World War, but it's estimated by Yad Vashem and others, 3 million Jews, of whom 1 million died, maybe 2%, 60,000 Christians in that Jewish community or married out. So maybe 20,000 died and 40,000 survived, but we don't know because communism took over. Sweden, again, I'm just taking you very quickly through. Sweden was a place that sheltered the Jews escaping from other parts of the world. So there were probably 15,000, 20,000 Jews passing through Sweden. And the president of the alliance is a man I'm particularly interested in, Robert Aperia. He first appears in the alliance conference records of the 1920s. I think he was there at the International in 1925. He is the president of the alliance, and he is in frequent communication with the Harcourt Samuel, helping people get out of Sweden and on to other countries. And Sweden, of course, had Raoul Wallenberg, who helped Jews escape, especially in Poland, Count Bernadotte, who made sure that Jews were rescued from Ravensbrück concentration camp, and Heinz Polak, some of you may have known him, a well-known Jewish believer in Israel, his family active in the Israeli Messianic movement today, also went through and lived in Poland for some time. Robert Aperia was honored by the king for his services in politics. And just recently, I was in Sweden. I'll be again in Sweden this summer. I managed to contact, I think, his sister, who is an educator with the Swedish synagogue in Stockholm, who was shocked that anyone would remember or mention her brother. And I then got a letter from the president of the synagogue saying, firstly, that she denies having this brother, and then that she doesn't want to talk about him. And then just recently, a Swedish believer I know, Jewish believer in Stockholm, met his son, I think it is. So we're trying to find out more, but he survived, and I'm assuming that others in Sweden survived as well. Switzerland, they were again helping people escape. There's Harry Hertz Hablutzel. I don't know if you remember him, anyone who was back in the 80s. So most of them survived. We don't know how many. And Harry Hertz was a great figure and a great character, as I'm sure some of us remember. Yugoslavia, I don't have that much information for, so I've just done my estimates. So to conclude, the key questions. How many national alliances were there before the Holocaust? In 1928, there were 13, 1938, 16, 1944, 7. How many remained after the alliance? 17 in 1950. How many Messianic Jews died in the Holocaust? All I can do is give you an estimate that I've been working on. I estimate 2% of the 6 million, which is about 111,000. Some estimate more, 150,000 died. And interestingly for me, that is the number which is very similar to the number I make today of self-identifying Jewish disciples of Yeshua. And if I'm right in these rough estimates, the number of Jewish believers in Yeshua who died in the Shoah is about the same number as those of us who self-identify as believers in Yeshua today. And I can send you my global charts and estimates. And if you can give me more information or more accurate figures, I'd be very grateful. For me, this is not just an academic project. It's something that brings great grief to my heart, but it also reminds me of God's faithfulness to his people. And of course, it reminds me that Yeshua is in the midst of his people and went through and suffered for us in the same way that Jewish people suffered in the Shoah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Welcome to Simcha Davidov, who has joined us, and Gail Levin, who has joined us from San Diego, and Juan Carlos Krauthammer from Argentina.
President of the
He's
Alliance.
the president of the Argentinian Alliance. Thank you all for coming. Richard, that was great. We know that there was a substantive presence of people, Hebrew Christians that were present and were swept up into the camps, and there was a witness in the camps, I'm sure, from those believers that got caught in the camps there. It is interesting to note that the vibrancy of the International, how it sprung back into existence after the war, and it jumped back even to a higher number of alliances after the war, and that despite the fact that the Russians and Polish and Eastern Europe was under the thumb of the communists, yet still can't put a stop to the work of the Spirit. And thank you very much for that. You are, if I can ask you, where is the state of the book that you have been working on from time to time, as you can find time for it? I know it's exhaustive to do. It's a lot of information.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. Well, it's changing shape because I'm realizing that I need to be telling more of the stories of people. And I need to be writing it in a way that gets story of individuals connected with historical events. So I'm doing a lot of the initial research. I'm learning so much, and I'm grateful for any help. But the book is going to be I'm trying to rewrite the whole treatment of the book now to have story and history more closely connected and to make it more readable.
Good.
But I
Great,
still
thank
want to get it out in time for 2025 if I can.
Yeah, that is very similar in concept to what the Winograds did in they just put out,
Belarus.
yeah, and I don't know if you've seen that book. It's phenomenally well done, but it tells the stories of people from Belarus that were caught. Some of them became believers, some of them were believers, but they do the same thing. They tell the stories, and the history is woven through so that it makes sense. You understand the cultural context, the context of time, the difficulties, and so forth. It's fascinating. It's really, really good. Well,
Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. This is a labor of love, and I know that you're probably enjoying this also in the sense that you're that this is the story of us, that it is our history. I'm doing the same thing in a way with the American Alliances. I'm working back through all the minutes of our conferences and our executive committee meetings and really looking for the motions and the significant activities from a prophetic view. And of course, the internationals prominently figured from time to time, especially in the early years of the American alliance.